Welcome, everybody, to Virtual Freak Film Festival. My name is Kathy Kilashewski. I'm the Artistic Director for Freak Film Festival. And if this is your first Freak Film Festival event, we're really excited that you're here. Freak Film Festival is a documentary-focused festival featuring films that are relevant and resonate in Detroit and Michigan. So we're showing 5 films during this virtual festival, and they're running from now until Sunday. So if you've purchased a ticket to a film, a specific film, you can watch it anytime between now and Sunday. And if you've purchased a festival pass, the same. You can pick any film and watch it whenever it's convenient for you. We do have some specific conversations, and this is one of them. This is the conversation for the film Waging Change. But we also have conversations happening later today and tomorrow for a few of the other films. So if you go to freakfilmfestival.com and check out the 2020 lineup, you can find out more about those conversations to come live to them and also participate in them by asking questions of the folks on the panel. If you've missed a conversation, they're archived on Freak Film Festival's Facebook page as well as on our YouTube page. So we're here for the conversation for Waging Change, which is a film that looks at an efforts to get a fair wage for restaurant workers. And the film takes us from New Orleans to Chicago to here in Detroit, which is why this film is such an important one for Freak Film Festival. We've got a great conversation ahead here that's going to include the director, Abby Ginzberg, and some folks that work in the restaurant industry here in Detroit. And it's being moderated by Freak Film Festival restaurant critic, Mark Kurlyandchik. So I'm going to have Mark join us here on screen. Hey, Mark. So thanks so much for moderating. And so I'm going to let you take it away. So enjoy the conversation and hope you can check out a bunch of Freak Film Festival events over the next couple of days. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you all for joining us today. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Mark Kurlyandchik. I'm the restaurant critic and dining reporter for the Detroit Free Press. And I'm also a documentary filmmaker, and I am honored to be moderating this panel today on Waging Change, a film which hopefully you just watched. Waging Change is about the fight to abolish the sub-minimum tipped minimum wage. I'm sorry, the sub-minimum tipped wage across the country for restaurant workers. I am honored to introduce the director, Abby Ginzberg, who is joining us today for a conversation.
Hello.
There she is. Hi, Abby. How are you doing?
Good, and I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited about this conversation. I also want to bring in Andrea Velasquez, who is one of the subjects in the film. She'll be catching us up on her life since the ending of the film. Hi, Andrea. How are you?
Hi. Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we also have with us Nik R, the head chef at The Kitchen by Cooking with Q, which is a vegan restaurant in Detroit. And in addition to being the head chef there, Nik has 17 years in the restaurant, 17 years of experience in the restaurant business. Hey, Nik, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. I think, there's a lot of things to talk about, and particularly now with the current state of the restaurant industry. But before we get there, Abby, can you tell us a little bit about what, the origin story behind this film? Yeah. What drew you to the topic in the first place?
So, to start with, I think of myself as a fairly well-educated person. I'm certainly somebody who goes out to eat quite a bit in the Bay Area. And I almost could not, I couldn't believe it when I heard Jayaraman, who's in the film, talk about the tip minimum wage. And although it isn't quite that low in Michigan, it's $2.13 in 17 states. And I just about fell off my chair when I heard her say that. And I had that experience that maybe you'll recognize that some documentary filmmakers have when you realize, oh my God, if I decide I really have to make a film about this, I am entering a 4 or 5 year journey right now. And that was kind of what happened. My hands got clammy, my heartbeat went up, I started to sweat, and I thought, yeah, this may be a story that I have to tell from the point of view of, if I didn't know this is how things were, there are going to be a lot of other people who don't know. So sort of the aha moment was listening to Saru. The next steps were introducing myself to her and saying, I'm a filmmaker from the Bay Area, and I think there's a real story here for the American public, just everybody who eats out anywhere, anytime. And so over time, we got to know each other. And then she had a kind of a habit of calling me maybe a day before there was going to be either an action or a demonstration or an event in Chicago. Detroit, she gave me a little bit more notice about. So what would happen is, or she'd call me on Monday and I'd have to be in DC on Wednesday. And that was, because this is a movement that was happening in real time, you just had to be flexible. So that's kind of how this whole thing came together. I jumped in, I raised a little bit of seed money so that I had something to work with when I got started. And I started following. First, I started really following the movement. And then over time, I started meeting the individual workers who were profiled in the film and making some choices about who, would be sort of centered in the film, et cetera. And it was really important for me since I live in California, and the situation in California is really different because California and 6 other states require the payment of full minimum wage plus tips. Okay, well, that's nice. So we don't have the same problem that you have in Michigan or the people had in Washington, D.C. or the people have in Chicago. So I needed, to leave home and find the stories elsewhere. And that's kind of what I did. And so, there's a Michigan story, there's a Chicago story, there's a Washington, D.C. story, and then there's a New Orleans person in the film. So the idea was to go for national representation, different challenges that different people faced. And because the movement was also very interested in and working with employers who really believed in paying, a good living wage to their workers, regardless of what state they were in, that I had to also follow some employers or find some employers whose stories I could tell. So it wasn't going to be a worker only thing. I had to have some story about employers. So that's kind of how the film got patched together. And this is all pre-pandemic. So now I have a post-pandemic epilogue. I'm doing it right as we speak because the film's going to go on public television in February, we hope. And I've got to be able to say, if you thought this was bad in terms of what I presented before, what happens when 10 million restaurant workers are laid off? Thank you very much.
Yeah. So quickly, can you just give us a little bit of sense of what you found in the epilogue? I mean, what are you finding right now?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things that really relate to the issue of the tip minimum wage. One of the major kind of catastrophes that hit in the pandemic context is that, let's say you're in a 213 state or even Michigan, a 357 state, the wages that your employer is likely to be reporting to the unemployment department are just the wages that they're paying you. I don't really understand. Everybody's got a different way of doing this, but so many workers did not meet the floor that was necessary to get unemployment. So that is like one, serious problem that we have to figure out how to fix moving forward. Because, I mean, if you were really making $30 an hour or $20 an hour or even $15 an hour, somehow unemployment doesn't know that. And so the standard of living just collapsed. I mean, literally out from under you overnight because all the orders to shut restaurants happened in a moment. So that was a complete disaster. And what One Fair Wage, the organization, did is that they raised millions of dollars. I mean, they did a magnificent job of raising money. But when you spread it out over the hundreds of thousands of workers who applied, everybody only got $500 if they were lucky. So that didn't end up, a nonprofit is not going to make up the difference that an unemployment system across the country could do. So one thing
federal government,
people were not getting their unemployment. So that's a disaster right there. Or if they were, it was $100 a week. The other things that have happened, so there's another issue that's happening now when we're kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of reopening, which is the expectation that restaurant servers and bartenders have to be public health officials. So you walk into the restaurant as a consumer, you're masked, hopefully. They take your temperature, then you take your mask off because you're drinking or eating. And every time the server comes anywhere near you, they are exposing themselves. And we have footage of this, and this is a big problem because these are people who have to be there for 8 hours a day. The customers are there for an hour or two. They're enjoying themselves, blah, blah, blah. So essentially what's happening is that the restaurant workers are becoming public health officials, having to tell the customers to be safe, wear your mask, blah, 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 in between courses or whatever. And they're the same people you're relying on for tips. It is unsustainable. So I don't know what the answer to that's going to be, but that is a new problem that has surfaced because of the requirements of what it means to be safe during a pandemic.
And meanwhile, many of these workers also, the industry isn't known for its, luxurious healthcare offerings. Paid sick leave is something that the National Restaurant Association has opposed, and the Michigan subsidiary has opposed every time it's come up. So on top of these sorts of situations, you also have workers who are very vulnerable, when they're outside of the restaurant. I want to bring Andrea into this. Andrea, you are a subject in the film, and you were working at a restaurant until COVID hit. Can you give us sort of the real life on the ground story of what your life has looked like since the end of this film?
I live with my family. I'm not working right now. There's really not much to report.
And you mentioned that you're not working right now because of COVID, right? That's you were working at a restaurant, and then once the pandemic hit, your job was eliminated, correct?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And so Abby mentioned this the difficulty of gaining unemployment. How has that situation worked out for you? Were you able to draw any unemployment?
No.
None at all.
Yeah, very typical.
Yeah.
And
Andrea, are you planning to try to stay in the restaurant industry, or are you, what's kind of on the horizon for you?
I'm really not sure. It's so hard to think about right now because, it's kind of been gutted.
Yeah,
definitely.
But we don't know.
Yeah, go ahead, Abby.
I was just going to say that's really an important point that you just made, that it's really been gutted. That's, I want to hear what Nik Cole has to say about that. But people are keeping it together with Scotch tape, and willing to take out. And I don't even know the numbers. I think it's 130,000 restaurants have been reported closed permanently since the pandemic. Yeah. So we're looking at a complete seismic shift within the industry. And I think that, in various places, and maybe some, the Danny Meyers of the world from New York are trying to figure out how they move forward in a sustainable way, which I give them a tremendous amount of credit for. But I don't know what a mom and pop's, restaurant does when they've just been piecing it together, every day. They don't know whether they're going to have to close. So I think Andrea's point about it's been gutted is really right. And we don't yet know what we're going to end up with.
Yeah, and it's hard. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's what I've been doing for 21 years now, is working in the restaurant industry. So it's hard to think of working something else, but at the same time, it's just there's really nothing there for me left in the industry.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's sort of the case with a lot of folks. I did a story earlier in the summer about this mass exodus of longtime hospitality employees who are basically shifting careers in their 30s and their 40s and in their 50s as they try to navigate this thing. Nik, I want to hear about your experience over at the kitchen. So many of these issues are being worked on, and now COVID has sort of thrown everything into uncertainty. How have things been for you guys?
At the moment, well, this is slow season for restaurants anyway, but with the shutdown, I can say that for the first time working there, for the first time during the whole pandemic, I've had to like cut hours or send people home early. And I hate to have to do that because obviously it's Christmas time and we've already had, experienced such a hard time over the pandemic. So yeah, I really hate having to cut hours and send people home, but it's really slow, slower than normal.
How does the kitchen view the one fair wage fight? What is your restaurant doing to sort of address some of these issues that were brought up in the film?
So for us, one thing, we're a new restaurant. The owner, she is mostly new to the restaurant industry. But obviously I've been working in the restaurant industry for about 17 years. So I've had a little bit more experience with different wage platforms. So we actually pay one wage for the front of the house and the back of the house, and the whole team splits the tips. And the more we make, obviously, the more we can give raises. We've been able to give one raise in the last 12 months that I've been there, which is good because I work at restaurants where I never, ever got a raise, and I worked there for like 7 years. So to be able to give someone a raise, especially during the pandemic, it kind of attracts a little bit more loyalty, a little bit different talent than you would give someone, you would attract if you didn't put those kind of incentives in.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask what you pay as your base wage? Forgetting the tips for the moment. What kind of money are we talking about?
So we pay $12 coming in the door right now.
Well, can I just say that is like really fabulous, because Michigan's minimum wage, I'm just looking at it, is $9.65. So you're essentially $2.50 over that, and with tips on top on a good day, that's that might be a real livable wage. This is what I mean. Let me just say that her situation is like what we wanted to highlight. And we unfortunately, we found, the Russell Street Deli was the restaurant that we went to, where they were paying $15 an hour and splitting tips on top. And that's, and that was a year and a half ago. So it is possible, and it happens and it was happening with Miss K's and so on. So it's like the situation, you can be a sustainable restaurant, even if your state's laws don't require you to be. So part of what we kind of want to say is that, maybe there's some other way to figure this out. The issue has to do with competition, so that they're paying $12 an hour in the door and somebody else down the road is paying $3.67 an hour. It's an unfair, the ground is not level if that's what's happening. And that's part of why we need state laws to require a level playing field. So a restaurant that wants to do right by its employees is not constantly undercut by the store around the corner or the restaurant around the corner. So I think this helps, she's working at a place that's doing it right, but how do we make that sustainable? By making everybody come up higher than where they are right now.
Well, and so, you talk about the need for legislation, and Michigan came awfully close to having a ballot measure that was then, as it's documented in the film, that type of fight where you're gathering petitions, hundreds of thousands of petitions to get it on the ballot, only for the legislature to then adopt it and gut it. Just the anti-democratic nature of that move is kind of startling. But it almost seems like that could put you in a helpless position. Where does one fair wage go from here in Michigan in that case?
Okay, so for kind of the audience who may not know exactly what happened in Michigan, what Mark said needs to be repeated. They got 350,000 ballot signatures to put, something that would eventually get rid of the tip minimum wage, but it would do it dollar by dollar over 4 or 5 years. So that was the goal: end the tip minimum wage and raise Michigan's full minimum wage to more than what it is right now, maybe to $12 an hour.
Yeah.
That was what was headed to the ballot. And then your Republican-controlled legislature, in a very cynical move, it's exactly what Mark said, adopted it, and then in their lame duck session, dumped it. So they took it off the ballot so the voters could not enact it into law, which they would have done, we believe, and did this sort of cynical thing where they said, we're passing it, give us credit, and then, in December, they got rid of it. A similar thing happened in Washington, D.C., and that's, one of the things about being a documentary filmmaker is you never quite know where the story's going to go. So we anticipated that Michigan was going to pass their increase in the minimum wage and the evolution of the end of the tip minimum wage, and we expected the same thing in Washington, D.C. And in both cases, in Washington, D.C., it was the D.C. City Council, in Michigan, it was the state legislature. The things were headed to the ballot, and in Washington it passed, and then the DC City Council overruled it and repealed it. So part of what I felt like my job was, as someone who was documenting this story, was to tell the citizens of Michigan and of DC, at least, to be aware of the anti-democratic actions of your elected representatives, because that's pretty shocking to me. And vis-a-vis DC, I thought the end of my film was going to be the DC thing passes. Terrific. We have a victory. Let's go on and do a ballot initiative somewhere else. Part of what we see from both Michigan and DC is that you really have to be sure you can protect the win, or you're saying it. I don't know about people being sort of depressed about it, but so there are other states that are trying to do similar things through the legislatures. Illinois is doing it. New York, there's been a big campaign in New York to get the end of the tip minimum wage, and Governor Cuomo did an odd thing. Last December, so a year ago, he declared they were going to end the tip minimum wage for workers and then excluded the restaurant industry. So the restaurant industry that makes up, 75% of all tipped workers in New York State got excluded. So they're still stuck with their tip minimum wage. But nail salon people who park your cars, people who are normally tipped, they all went to a minimum wage plus tips in New York. So we're trying to, keep some pressure on New York State to have that changed. So it's these local efforts are all we have until we have a Democratic Senate that is willing to consider doing it on a national level. And
yeah, I guess my question sort of goes to agency for the public, right? You can have a restaurant owner that chooses to pay their workers well, and maybe the public can choose to support them, but in terms of what the public can do to affect change, to help this campaign, even if they sign the petition, that sort of agency has been taken away from them. So what can the public do then to support the movement?
I went into this to educate the consumer public about the issue. So the first thing people need to do is to find out about it. So I always feel like it's an act of self-education to watch this film and to kind of put it into your head that the people that you're dealing with in restaurants, maybe only making $2.13 or $3 an hour, and they're living off your tips. That requires an adjustment in how you think about this whole restaurant going experience. So that's number one. You got to educate yourself, and you got to tell other people you're eating out with what's going on. The next step is, I don't think people should be discouraged, because I think in the end, it looked bad for Biden for a long time, but I think in the end, truth and democracy are very strong if we keep fighting for them. So what happened in DC was all the DC City Council people that voted to overturn Initiative 77 got voted out of office. And, that's a big ask in Michigan, given how crazy your state is. But people need to be held accountable. And the role of the public is in part to hold people accountable. So it requires figuring out who did this. Who are the individual legislators? Am I represented by any of them? I would expect that people in downtown Detroit are not represented by those people, but people in the suburbs might be. So there's a question of who represents me and how did they vote on this Michigan initiative a year and a half ago? We have to do some research to find that out. But there was another positive effect, which was that in the mobilization campaign to get this initiative on the Michigan ballot, it ended up helping to elect Whitmer and whoever your attorney general is. So there were some Democrats who were elected who are much more progressive on living wage issues than had been there before. And so you have to sort of see it in the big picture. And I am somebody, if we don't remain optimistic and if we do not remain engaged and activist, our country is really going to go to hell in a handbasket. So I am somebody, I'm old, and I've just decided, we've got to see the silver linings in everything that we do. I was one who thought we should celebrate Biden's victory because it wasn't clear he was going to win. And so rather than worrying about all the people who didn't vote for him, I'm into saying, we pulled this off and American democracy was tested in a very real way and we came through. So I personally want to celebrate that. So I don't know. I mean, Nik, do you have a thought about more or Andrea about, kind of the other role of the public in all of this? How does the consumer going public, kind of support how do we let people know, for example, that you're paying $12 an hour? I bet people don't have a clue that you might pay a living wage when somebody, a restaurant somewhere near you doesn't.
So I don't think that they have a clue. Part of me thinks that they don't really care when they go out to eat. I've lived in Las Vegas for about 4 years. And I worked in the industry. I worked at a casino as a pool girl. I've had probably every job in the restaurant industry, but no one cared. They continue to tip. They don't care how much you make an hour. All they care about is good service. And then I come back home to Michigan where people make way less money. And I honestly don't think that people care. They care about good food. They care about good service. And if you build those wages into your prices, it's easier. I'm not going to say get away with, but people, they don't really feel like they're being unjust by paying the prices because they totally get something out of it. Everybody eats out. So I part of me feels like they should be educated on what we actually do make, but I think paying a livable wage and then actually giving good service and good food is like the bigger issue.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we can't go from serving somebody a $3 burger to giving them a $6 burger overnight, but I do feel like if we build the prices right into the product,
I agree with that.
They don't really mind paying it.
I mean, I live in a state where that happens.
Yeah.
People, it's like the same waitress or server or bartender that works in Michigan and gets not paid enough is doing the same work where I am. And people like me are paying whatever I get charged and still tipping 20%. One of the things that you're saying, which I think is true, is that every study shows that tipping it does not go down. People don't think about whether or not workers are making a fair wage. It's exactly what you're saying. They're used to tipping. We live in a tipping society. What people don't know, though, is that the tips are your wage. That's the piece that's the missing piece. Yeah. But nobody is advocating the end of tipping. That is not where we're headed here. Right. And I think what Nik just said, which is, provide a good service and people will still tip 20% on it and just make sure you're covering your costs.
That's a great point, Abby. I want to jump on something you just said because nobody is advocating for the end of tipping, right? I mean, that is as a gratuity, you should be able to have that option to give a gratuity. It's the sub minimum wage that is the issue here. And I think, when we talk about eliminating, doing something different with our tipping model or eliminating the tipping model in this country, people think, well, I still want to be able to give the tip, not realizing that, that there's nuance to this conversation, that it's not about eliminating the ability to give a tip for good service. It's about making sure that the wages are being paid by the employer and that the workers are being taken care of. I mean, have you found that disconnect in your work?
Are you asking me? Well, I think in the film, let me just say that in the film, what we found was that campaign in DC of, quote, save our tips really scared the hell out of the workers because I mean, if you were making back in the day in DC, it was $277 an hour. It went up to $350. But if you're making $25 an hour, 99% of which comes from tips, you as sure as hell did not want your tips to go away. And so the restaurant industry did a very effective and just, it was just false consciousness campaign about Save Our Tips. There was never an argument that tips were going to be taken away or that people wouldn't tip. So I think there's a lot of false consciousness about that in general. And, and the thing passed anyway. But the thing that scared the workers, because they know what percentage of their income is coming from tips versus what percentage of their income was coming from wages. I mean, in DC, you had a lot of zero wages checks, but people were doing pretty well. And so it was terrifying to people, and I understood that. But so we wanted to kind of get behind this, Save Our Tips was a scary campaign that the Restaurant Association was running to get workers to oppose the increase in the minimum wage. So it's fake news or however you want to call it. But
disinformation is rampant these days. No.
Say that again, Mark?
Disinformation. It's a disinformation campaign to sort of sow doubt and confusion. We only have about 10 minutes left, and I want to just put a call out just in case anybody's watching this live right now. If you have questions as an audience member, please let us know. We'll put it to our panelists. But in the meantime, as you're thinking about questions, Andrea, I want to ask you, a lot of what we're talking about is basically, it's government action. It's legislation that needs to be passed. It's local, federal, on all levels. What are you hoping for as someone who was in the industry? Is not now. What's your hope from the government, and how are you feeling about what they've provided thus far?
I'm hoping they raise the wage.
Yeah.
But in terms of unemployment help or additional stimulus, are you hopeful that you'll be able to sort of make it through?
Well, yeah, but I'm lucky in the fact that I have family that's supportive. So not everybody has absolutely. That. So, I mean, that's something that I'm lucky, and I know that not everybody has that ability or that like safety net.
Do you plan to go back to restaurant work, say once there's a vaccine and the COVID pandemic is kind of under control? Are you planning on going back to doing restaurant work?
I mean,
take your time.
It's kind of so scary now.
I want to underscore that. It's, if you have an underlying health condition of any kind, the amount of exposure that happens for people who are forced to go back. I mean, Andrea's lucky in the sense that, as she says, she has supportive family, but you've got other people who are the support of their family. They've got 2 or 3 little kids at home, and they absolutely have to make some kind of a living. Their level of exposure is really high in this industry at this moment. So it is scary. And I just want to underscore that it's,
I want to jump on a word that you said, people being forced to go back, because I often, when I write about, I did a story just a few weeks ago when this latest dining shutdown came about the relief that many workers were feeling to not have to be exposed or deal with, and obviously there's a lot of economic anxiety and uncertainty that comes with this, but there's also a sense of relief. And so one criticism that I often hear in my own reporting when I do stories like that as well, nobody's forcing people to work in restaurants. It's a choice. If you don't like the system, go work in another industry. So Nik, I want to put that question to you. You've been in the business for 17 years now. So, why stay in an industry that is rampant with abuse and things? And how realistic is it for you to just go and find a job somewhere else, doing something else?
I mean, what else would I be doing? I love food. I love people. And I think I have a gift. I mean, if I'm not going to do it, someone else is obviously going to have to do it. We don't just feed people who, just want to eat out. We feed frontline workers. We feed, I've worked for U of M where I actually, fed hospital patients on a daily basis. Everybody needs food. So for people to say we're not forced to work in this industry, like food is literally a part. I mean, you can't live without food. So I think that's kind of always a really ignorant statement to make. On top of that, like, everybody is not supposed to be a doctor. We live in a society where there are low-paying jobs and there are really high-paying jobs. Everybody needs to make an income. So to tell someone who, say for instance, people who work for me, like I said before, I feel bad when I have to cut their hours because I am a person who I'm the head chef at the kitchen, but I'm a rock instructor, chef instructor. I do a lot of other things. So I'm able to like diversify myself, but I do not think that my employees are able to fashion themselves in the same manner that I am. They don't know how. They don't know how to go somewhere and get another job. They can't really afford to take any additional college classes. All that stuff is expensive, So to tell someone that you're not being forced to work in this industry, I think it's hurtful, it's ignorant, and if you're going to tell people that, then you should absolutely not go out to eat anywhere ever, because I mean, that's just mean.
So I want to, can I just sort of roll in on this? When we say, people it's like being called back to work. So some employers have tried to provide some means to some of their employees for support during this pandemic. And then they say, okay, we're calling, X number of people back to work. People are, many people have to go back, as I say, because they're the sole support of their family, of their kids, whatever. So it's like, it does not feel like an option. And they don't necessarily have supportive family who can house them or feed them themselves. So, okay, so that's like part of why they have to decide about whether they're going to go back. The other point that needs to be made is that this is, it's really what Nik was saying, it's a profession. I mean, she's been at it 17 years. Every person that I spoke to who worked in hospitality or was a server indicated to me that they do it because they love it. They don't love all the conditions of their workplace necessarily, but they wouldn't be in it for 10, 15, 20 years if they didn't like the personal interaction with their, with the customers, if they didn't like being around food and making people have a nice experience. I mean, this is, people choose this industry. And in order to make it sustainable, both for the owners and for the workers, we have to change how we view the people who serve us and who work in these restaurants. I mean, I think that's really it's like, not only not everybody needs to be a doctor, but it's like, let us honor the people and with a living wage for whom this is what they do, and we want them to be doing it because when we go to a restaurant, we want somebody who wants to be there.
Right.
They came to work because they want to make us feel good about having walked in the door. So it's like insane.
And it's a privilege for us to walk through the door. Let's not forget that. Just the fact that we can even afford to do that. That's a point of privilege. And I think sort of one of the kind of larger issues that is kind of driving this whole conversation is, and I interact with this in my work all the time, is that food is thought of, or at least has historically been thought of as some kind of form of escape. Even in the newspaper section, you went to the food section so you didn't have to read all the bad news in the front page. And I think that we've been conditioned to sort of disconnect the politics of food with the reality. You know, we've treated it in our culture as this sort of hedonistic. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely privilege wrapped up in all of this. And people just don't want to confront the realities of the choices that they make as consumers, because too often when you peer behind the curtain, the reality is what you find here in this industry, where there's rampant abuse and underpayment. I guess in closing, my last, and we'll kind of go around and ask all of you here, you know, now with all the turmoil that the industry is in with COVID, do you think, you know, I've heard on one side people think that we're not going back to any type of old sense of normal, and this is sort of the time to retool the restaurant industry to make it, you know, work better for everyone. On the other hand, you have folks who say that, well, you know, the independent restaurants are going to be gone. It's all going to be corporate chains. And that certainly isn't, you know, all that of an exciting a future. I want to ask each one of you, and Abby, we'll start with you. You know, do you think COVID will how will it ultimately affect this fight for one fair wage? Do you think that it's set back the momentum, or is it in fact going to sort of propel us into this next moment for the restaurant industry?
I mean, I'm just going to rely on my innate optimism and say that it's going to propel us to a more equitable future. I mean, we are at a tipping point in this society around a lot of issues about wage inequality anyway. And I mean, you know, I don't remember, it's like, what is it? You know, 12 families have as much wealth as, you know, the other half of the billions of people on this planet. I mean, we are at such a tipping point vis-a-vis that anyway, that we have to get into better alignment, or I think we're going to implode. So I remain optimistic that maybe we will be, I mean, let me say this about restaurants and kind of when the pandemic hit. I do not believe that every restaurant owner was happy to see all their employees thrown out on the street with no safety net under them. That was not, I mean, people were like, everybody was in a state of shock and being stunned and not knowing what to do next. So it forced both owners and employees to think about, how are we going to come back together in some way that is more sustainable long term? And the other thing we learned with the pandemic is that having our healthcare totally tied to our employment, which was not really the case in the restaurant industry, but was true everywhere else, was a mess. So we are forced as a country to be having a reckoning with both how do we provide health care for the people of the United States and how do we provide a living wage. So I am sort of cautiously optimistic that we are going to inch along to a better future down the road. But there has been huge damage, sacrifice, you know, disasters that have hit many, many restaurants, and that would be both the employers and the employees. So it's like, it's not, we're going to, if to the extent that the industry rises a bit like a phoenix, we got to pay attention to what the ashes look like. You know what I mean? So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think we're in a moment, a pivotal moment around being able to move forward. Let me say this. I never expected my film to be dovetailing with the kind of impact that we've seen the pandemic has had on the restaurant industry. So I feel like the level of conversation about what do we do about the restaurant industry has really taken off during the pandemic. Because the reality is, as a country, I mean, if we spend more under normal circumstances, the United States, as consumers, we spend more than 50% of our food budget, in many cases, eating out. Okay, if we go back to a 35% investment in eating out, that's still a significant proportion of like our gross national product. So we have to figure out how to do this in a way that doesn't, have us hitting another pandemic wall 4 years from now. So as I say, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think, everybody from owners to workers to the movement to state legislators are all beginning to engage in kind of one conversation that may, in fact, lead us to some serious, kind of new rules and regulations down the road.
Andrea, do you agree with Abby? How are you feeling about how COVID is going to impact all these issues?
She's muted.
Oh,
You're muted.
You got to unmute your mic. Yep, there you go.
Oh, I think Abby is maybe right that there's, because of everything it's been gutted. So now there's nowhere to go but up.
Yeah. That's one way to say it. Yeah.
Nik, what about you? How do you feel about COVID and its impact on these issues?
I feel like I can't remember how many of us actually work in the industry, what that number is, but I feel like because it's so many of us, and we've all been affected by the fact that we can't even afford to get COVID. Like we can't afford to take a day off because we don't have any PTO. Most of us don't even have health care that's provided by our employer. I think that those type of things that we've always dealt with, they're more on the forefront. And as employees, I think it's making us think a little bit differently about the work that we do, the environment that we work in, the amenities that we have, and how we can actually, afford them. So I think in the future, we as employees will feel more empowered to actually work in legislature, vote people in who actually have our back, who actually have our health in mind. Like I said, we can't even afford to take a day off if we get sick, let alone for like a vacation or something. So yeah, I think that kind of like what Abby said, I think that because we've been hit so hard, we will start thinking more about like voting. And I think that we can actually change, change what our workforce looks like.
Yeah, I mean, there's some hope in all of your sentiments, and I think that's probably the best thing is with a little bit of hope for the future of the industry. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and all the viewers out there who've been watching. Abby, I do want to just give you the last word and find out what's next for you as a filmmaker.
Well, I have another, thanks for asking. I have another film that's sort of, on the circuit, on the virtual circuit. You can see the poster behind me. It's called Truth to Power, Barbara Lee Speaks for Me. And maybe next year we'll be back at FREEP with that one. It's a story about my congresswoman, who is an African-American, truth-telling African-American woman that was the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, has spoken truth to power the entire 22 years she's been in Congress, and is quite an amazing woman. And actually, because people in Detroit probably have no idea who she is, that's part of why I made the film. Just like I wanted to educate people about the tip minimum wage, I felt like I was represented by one of the truly great people in Congress, and I wanted to share her story with a wider audience. And what she is best known for is back after 9/11, George Bush went to Congress and asked for sort of an authorization for a blank check to go anywhere he wanted to in the world and, create military interventions. And Barbara Lee was the only person in Congress, Senate and House, who voted no. And she had totally been proved right that was the right vote. And so I mean, as we're talking about getting legislators to do the right thing, I think my next film really creates the story of somebody who has done that her entire life and has done it as a single mother raising 2 kids on welfare. So, how did that affect everything else that she stood up for throughout her entire career? So
that's great. Well, we look forward to seeing that film.
Another important film.
Yeah, we'll look for it next year, hopefully.
Good.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us. Thank you all again. I want to remind you, too, that the virtual FREEP Film Festival goes until Sunday. You can find out what films are screening, get your tickets at freepfilmfestival.com, and you can watch those films at your leisure now through Sunday. You don't have to, hit it at 4 o'clock. So thanks again. I'm Mark Kurlyandchik for the Detroit Free Press, signing off.